Hello, it's Lindy, and welcome to another Friday Reads on Lindy's Magpie Reads. I have got so many books this week, and I'm going to try and get through it quickly, starting with a couple of bookish things that I did this week. I went to Audrey's Books to pick up something I had ordered, Membranes. It's by a Taiwanese author, Ta-Wei, and it is for booktuber Jen the Librarian's project of reading queer lit in translation. And so this is this month's read-along, and the translator of this is Larissa Heinrich. It was originally published in 1995, and it's cyberpunk. I've read the first chapter already, and it's set under the sea, and I'm liking it already. And then while I was there at the bookstore, even though I had to hold on for a library copy of this book, it was on the 25% off because it's a Globe and Mail bestseller, Heather O'Neill's When We Lost Our Heads. So I'm going to get to this very soon. All right, and the other bookish thing was an online talk by Louise Bernice Halfe. She is Canada's Parliamentary poet. She is Nehua, or Cree is the way non-Nehia people refer to them. And she opened her talk speaking in her first language, Cree language, which was wonderful. And it prompted me to do a land acknowledgement. I am so happy to be living on Treaty 6 territory. This is the traditional and ancestral home of the Nehia, or Cree, and the Deni, the Saulteaux, the Dakota Sioux, and the Blackfoot, and also the Métis Nation of Alberta. This week, I have read 7 books by Indigenous authors. So, let's see. 3 of them are 3 audiobooks, 2 picture books, 1 graphic novel, and 3 other books. So here we go. I'm going to start with the picture book. I Sang You Down from the Stars. The author is Tasha Spillett-Sumner. She is an Inawak, a Cree from Manitoba, and Trinidadian. She's a mixed ethnicity. And the illustrator, Goade, is Tlingit. So 2 Indigenous authors for this picture book. Goade, I say good, Goade. She won the Caldecott Award last year for her book, The Water Protectors. That one was written by Carol Lindstrom. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful picture book. And I really love Goade's illustrations. I think she was the first Indigenous author to win the Caldecott Award. That's a picture book illustration award. So I really love her illustrations in here. I'll have to show you while I talk. It is incorporating Ninawa traditions in this book, welcoming a baby to a family. And The text part of it, I am not quite as sold on. I find it pretty sappy. It's as if it's a journal from a mother to her unborn child, and then mother to her newly born child, telling the child about a sacred bundle that she's preparing, and all of the sort of emotional work that goes into welcoming a new baby into the family. And definitely not related to adoptive families, because there's lots of reference to you being in my belly and getting strong inside me and all that. But yeah, I mean, it's for babies, so I shouldn't be so, I don't know, like, with care in my hands, I sewed your first star blanket. With each stitch, I whispered a prayer for you and thought about wrapping you up warm and safe, just like you are now in my belly. Into your bundle it goes. And you arrived in the spring with the waters that come when the ice breaks and the rivers flow again. For the first time after our long wait, I looked down at you and found stars in your eyes. Our hearts danced together. Oh, okay. It's very sweet. It did get an honor award from the American Indian Library Association Book Awards. And so did this one, which I liked even better. It's called We Are Still Here. The author is Traci Sorell, who is Cherokee, and the illustrator is Frane Lessac, who is not Indigenous. And it's a very kind of naive style of art, and it's an information picture book. The subtitle is Native American Truths Everyone Should Know. And this one is aimed at about grade 2 to grade 5. And it is excellent. I loved this one, Borders. So this is based on a short story written by Thomas King quite a long time ago. And it's done in graphic novel format by Natasha Donovan. And almost all of it is set at the Coutts border crossing between Alberta and the United States. It was surreal to be reading this at the same time as the trucker convoy protest was blocking the border, also called the Crybaby Convoy. Yes, so what happens is a Blackfoot woman and her son are going to visit the boy's sister in Salt Lake City, and at the border, at the U.S. crossing, she gets asked what her nationality is. She says Blackfoot, and she won't say anything further, and she gets turned around, not allowed in, at the Canadian border crossing, so that's like 100 yards, away. The Canadian border won't let her in, without her identifying what her nationality is. She just says Blackfoot. And so for several days, they're caught up there in a no man's land, despite agreements that have been made allowing Indigenous people they belong to groups that straddle the border, which the border came after them. You know what I mean? It's a really good look at an Indigenous perspective on these national borders. Then I listened to an audiobook, The Firekeeper's Daughter. That's by Angeline Boulley. And the audiobook is read by Isabella Starr-LeBlanc, who does a pretty good job. There's lots of Anishinaabe words in it, and she manages fine with those. She really mangles the French, and she calls a toque a toque. Toque, yeah, a toque with a hat. But I'll forgive her for that, because otherwise I thought she did a really great job with the audiobook. The audiobook is a page turner, or in audiobook format. You know, I could have speeded it up because I was like, what's going to happen? It is about mixed ethnicity girl, teenager, Donis, and it's the issues that it encompasses include tribal enrollment, tribal politics, meth addictions, racism, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and traditional knowledge and how solutions can be found through traditional knowledge. And I really love the way that the elders come through as the heroes in this novel. It is set in, it's a fictional community, but it is based on Angeline Boulley's own community, which is the Sault Ste. Marie tribe on the American side of the Canadian-US border. It straddles the border. And there is an issue that comes up in this novel as well about being able to cross the border freely, actually not being able to cross the border freely, even though by rights, you know, sometimes they're allowed and sometimes they're not. That's basically what it comes down to. So, yeah, I recommend that one. Another novel, so this one I read in print, and it is Home Waltz by G.A. What is his last name? Grisenthwaite, Gordon Grisenthwaite. This was on the short list for the Governor General's Award in 2021. And Sean the Book Maniac read the first chapter to me. And that first chapter didn't really, I thought it was okay. It seemed very YA to me. The story is told from the viewpoint of a 14 or 15-year-old. They call him Mosquito. And he is also of mixed ethnicity. And he's on a reserve. The whole book is really in compressed time because it takes place over the course of 2 days, a Friday and a Saturday, with all of this anticipation that Mosquito has for a live concert that's coming up, a dance. All the issues in here make it pretty raw, especially because it's coming from this 14-year-old viewpoint with alcohol, drugs, anger, violence, hormones, sex, the way that young people living in a tiny place have a small group of age mates that they hang around with as friends, although they're not necessarily good for each other. And so the internal growth we see happening in Mosquito just over this 2 days, and having to do with the friendships as well, or the meanness of his friends, and also his deep love of music, and how, you know, that can be enough to get you through by the end of this, I just loved it. I loved it. And I really cared about Mosquito. There are a lot of words. The colonial name for the Indigenous group in here is Thompson River Salish, so towards the interior of BC, and there were a few words that I was able to easily understand just from context. The word for his grandmother, which is like yeah. The word for white people, sama, and the word for his penis. And then there were other words that I could have looked up, and I didn't. These are words that are spelled in a convention that's used now for I think across the Salish languages, with question marks and L's with a line across, symbols that I don't know what they mean and would have to look them up. And so I would say primary audience for this book are the people of that community, especially the younger people of that community who could identify with what this boy is going through. But I certainly got a whole lot out of it, and it reminded me of books like Tommy Orange's There, especially the character, I think his name was Tony, who had fetal alcohol syndrome. Thomas Yapow's book, The Ex-Indian Chronicles, and Richard Van Camp's The Lesser Blessed. Actually, Larry in The Lesser Blessed is much more likable than Mosquito, although, like I said, by the end, I was definitely in Mosquito's camp. Yeah. And a similar book that I just finished today is All the Quiet Places. This is by Brian Thomas Isaac. Also set in the interior of BC, but a different Salish group, Interior Salish, or the Syilx people. Although they use the same word for white people, sama, in here. So Home Waltz is set in 1973. All the Quiet Places is set in the mid-50s through to the mid-60s. It's another coming-of-age story. Eddie lives on the reserve with his mother and little brother. And it's a much more gentle and evocative story than Home Waltz, but it covers many of the same issues with alcoholism and violence and the young people taking their own lives. That's in Home Waltz as well. And it's beautiful. I've got all these flags marking sections. I'm still processing it. Definitely recommend it. And then another audiobook I read is a memoir coming of age, primarily aimed at a YA audience, Eric Gansworth. Now, he's also written YA novels. I've read one of them. So this book is called Apple, Skin to the Core, and it won the American Library Association's YA book award last year. I think I mentioned that Firekeeper's Daughter was an honor book in that same category. So Apple is written entirely in verse, some free verse, some rhyming verse, and there are paintings that the author did and photographs, which, of course, those aren't in the audiobook, which is narrated by the author, but you can go to the author's website and find them there. And there are close ties between the things that the author was so passionate about when he was a kid in the 70s, mostly is where it's set, including Batman, everything Batman, Star Wars, the Beatles music, and he ties in his writing quite closely with these cultural references. And again, those same issues like being able to cross the border, issues of racism and violence and alcoholism, poverty, those are all in this book as well. So those are all the Indigenous titles that I read this week. I read a really short audiobook. It's 2 hours long, Comfort Me with Apples. It's a novella if you're reading it in print, and it's by Catherine Valente. It is so creepy, and it just gets creepier and creepier as it goes along, and it is drawing closely on a couple of traditional stories, well, one in particular, but I don't even want to say which one because that will give too much away. And this is the kind of book where it's best to just experience it as it goes along, and your brain is starting to say, oh, wait a minute, oh, wait a minute. It's a delight. So, like I said, creepy, but really, really good. Yeah. And finally, this one is from Australia, Words in My Hands. The author is Asphyxia, who is deaf. And the central character in this book is a deaf teenager who's an artist and a budding activist. And she is living in near future Melbourne. It's quite Orwellian. There's fuel shortages and food shortages. And to combat the food shortages, there's something called biospore, some kind of something algae-like, I don't know, nutrition that is reconditioned into food. And the word has been spread that wild food, like homegrown or even from farms, is suspect. It's not entirely safe. And so this is about people battling the big corporations. The book is written as if it's a journal, and every page is decorated and just beautiful. It is such a joy to read. And also it's about deaf culture in that, what is her name? Piper. Piper was brought up to lip read and to speak, but it takes a lot of energy, and her hearing aids hurt her ears, and it's not until she meets other deaf people and falls in love with a guy who's the child of a deaf adult, Coda. That things really start to change for her. I found out that Australian Sign Language is actually different from North American Sign Language. I used to be quite fluent in sign language because I worked with deaf people at the post office. And so yeah, I was really interested in this. It's really well done. Definitely a recommended book. I'll show you from the artist statement, or the author artist statement at the very end. There she is. Can you read that? It's not my goal to be normal. So she has advice for how to relate to deaf people at the end. And oh, by the way, it has a different title in Australia. I think it's called Future Girl there. But Greg of Supposedly Fun talked about Oscar nominations on one of his recent videos, and I've already mentioned I'm not much of a movie watcher, but one of the films that he really liked is called Coda. It's about a deaf family, and I asked my sweetie if we had whatever a service has that movie, and she said yes, and we watched it. It's called Coda. I loved it. It's really good. And that reminds me, another deaf novel, What Willow Says by Lynn Buckle. That one recently won the Barbellion Prize, which is for books about disability. Bob the Booker talks about it and about the other books on the short list on a video. I'll link it down below. And I first heard about this book from Sean the Book Maniac. So I'm going to link to what he's got to say about it as well. So that is my Friday reads, and if you have read any of these or can think of similar ones that you'd recommend to me, if my talking about them has made you want to read them, I'd love to know that. So please leave me a comment down below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.